erase the convictions of others. We may see it today.
The first convicted felon to take the oath of office. Stephen, it is a distinction that Donald Trump did not want and fought in multiple courts to avoid, but he was convicted in May here in New York of falsifying business records, sentenced less than 2 weeks ago to an unconditional discharge. Trump was able to avoid prosecution on more serious charges precisely because he won the election. His cases over subverting the 2020 election and mishandling classified documents have gone away. Criminal case in Georgia is just a mess and may never be brought. And Stephen, as you say, he may now be in a position to pardon some of the nearly 1,600 individuals who have been charged in the 4 years since the January 6th attack on the Capitol. We're not sure which of those defendants he is exactly prepared to pardon, but some of those may come in a series of actions taken today, Stephen.
Aaron Katersky's from New York, our senior investigative correspondent. The mayor of that city got a call last night that he was invited to this inauguration, Aaron. Eric Adams hit the road right away.
Sure did. He himself may be looking for a pardon from the future president because he, too, has been indicted on corruption charges here in New York, accused of taking bribes in exchange for official favors, and he has been to Mar-a-Lago. He has been currying favors, seemingly, with the president-elect as he perhaps seeks to have his criminal cases go away. But the mayor says he is there to represent New York and its interests. He says he is not, as many Democrats have adopted this position, not interested in fighting with the new president, but in trying to seek common ground.
The first inauguration of a president was held in New York at Federal Hall in 1789. George Washington began this tradition that carries on today. This is the 60th time that a president before an audience will be sworn in. Washington's second inaugural was in Philadelphia as the nation's capital worked its way south. Thomas Jefferson was the first president to be inaugurated inside the Capitol building in 1801. Back then, the ceremonies were held in early March. That particular day, it was a mild 55 degrees, and the swearing-in was held inside the old Senate chamber. Outdoor celebrations of inaugurations began with James Monroe in 1817. In 1841, the cold weather on Inauguration Day was blamed for the short presidency of William Henry Harrison. It was a blustery day, that March day, that Harrison rode a horse to the Capitol without a hat or an overcoat. His inaugural address outdoors lasted an hour and 40 minutes, and the legend has it that Harrison caught his death of cold that day. He developed pneumonia and died a month later. Cold weather in 1853 was also blamed for the death of an outgoing First Lady, Abigail Fillmore, Millard Fillmore's wife. She also died of pneumonia about a month after sitting on a cold, exposed platform in the rain. In 1909, it snowed about 10 inches on Inauguration Day, and that too forced the swearing-in indoors. But in 1961, for John F. Kennedy, crews worked around the clock to clear 8 inches of fresh snow that had fallen the day before the inauguration. It was only 22 degrees on Inauguration Day, but the ceremony was held outdoors, and it gave us the famous footage of JFK urging Americans to ask not what your country can do for you. What you might not have known back in 1961 was that heaters were brought in for the dignitaries on the platform, and a small electrical fire lit up the podium during the invocation. Secret Service agents acted fast to smother the flames. By the way, the warmest inauguration on record was Ronald Reagan's first in 1981. It was in the mid-50s that January day. 4 years later, of course, it was so frigid that D.C. streets looked frozen over. It was 7 degrees out, felt like below zero, and the ceremony was moved indoors. We're watching now as the future First Lady, once and future First Lady, Melania Trump, is being walked in the crypt of the Capitol, escorted on the arm of a military aide. She's dressed in black with a wide-brimmed hat, a black hat that has a white band trim around it. ABC's Karen Travers is with us from the White House. Karen, what a moment for Melania Trump.
You know, and she did an interview last week, Stephen, with Fox News and said that she's ready for this move back into the White House and indicated she would spend most of her time in Washington. She said when she needs to be in New York, she would be there, or in Florida, but that she, her priority on this would be being a First Lady and then serving the country after January 20th. She said that she knows the process and knows the rooms very well, that the first time moving in was challenging, as she put it. She said they didn't have much of the information, sort of blaming the outgoing Obama administration for not helping them move in. She said this time she's packed and ready to go.
Armed Forces Chorus and tenor, Christopher D. Macchio.
We're about to hear a musical performance. An operatic singer who has a big fan in President-elect Trump is about to perform "Oh America." So let's just listen to the beginning of that selection. Who performed at the Madison Square Garden rally, will sing the national anthem inside the rotunda at the conclusion of today's ceremonies. Around 800 people are now sitting inside the Capitol Rotunda. Some 1,300 more are in Emancipation Hall, which is an area of the Capitol Visitor Center, and that's meant to essentially be a spillover crowd. There were more than 1,600 tickets for seats on the platform that had this event been held outside. Of course, there were hundreds of thousands of people who had presumably come to Washington to watch these ceremonies in person, but they got the word on Friday that any opportunity to see this all outside would not be happening because of the weather. And so an event was hastily arranged at the Capital One Arena here in Washington, where the ceremony is being played out to a large crowd on the jumbotrons. We now see the current president and first lady, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, walking side by side through the Capitol crypt. They're about to be introduced and to take their seats on the dais as the sitting president for 20 and vice president for 27 more minutes. I'm Stephen Portnoy, and you're listening to live coverage from ABC News of the 60th presidential inauguration. Let's go back to the White House. ABC's Karen Travers, the final minutes of the Biden presidency.
The final minutes here as he's walking into that rotunda of the Capitol with his vice president. And you know, Stephen, much has been talked about since the election that Vice President Harris lost about what Joe Biden could have done differently, whether he could have said he was not running for re-election or dropped out of his re-election campaign earlier to give her or other Democrats more time in a campaign against Donald Trump. That, of course, did not happen. She did not win, came up short. But, you know, that relationship, I think, is something that is going to be looked at and studied for what could have been and how he might have been able to tee her up for success in a different way. Their relationship was not similar to the one that he had with Barack Obama, who he described as such a close friend. He had lunch with him every week when he was vice president. They didn't share that same type of relationship. It will be interesting to see what that relationship is like once they both leave Washington today.
Karen, you've been at the White House all morning. You saw the president-elect and the former First Lady arrive, being greeted by the current president and First Lady. You heard Joe Biden say something like, "Welcome home."
He did. "Welcome home," the president said to Donald Trump as he greeted him at the top of the North Portico steps, the front door of the White House. The Bidens and the Trumps briefly spoke before posing for a picture before they went inside for a couple of minutes for that ceremonial tea and coffee. Remember, this is something that Donald Trump did not give to Joe Biden 4 years ago on his inauguration day, something that President Biden said he was going to do this year and make sure that all of those traditions were kept. The president confirmed to reporters, Stephen, that he left a letter to the incoming president. He wouldn't say what he wrote to him.
As you mentioned, Karen, the tradition of presidents attending their successors' inauguration is back on track. It's only happened 4 times in history that an outgoing president declined to attend his successor's inauguration. It's John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Johnson did it in 1869, unwilling to celebrate the victory of the Civil War icon Ulysses S. Grant, and then Donald Trump in 2021. This year, things seem back on track. One question, of course, today is, will we hear the announcement of pardons today for the January 6th rioters? That remains at this hour an open question. Senior members of the congressional staff are now being escorted in, and we now have our first glimpse here at the Capitol of the president-elect, Donald Trump, walking by himself through the crypt to soon be announced on the stage. We're first going to hear the swearing in of Vice President-elect Vance, James David Vance, who goes only by J.D. without punctuation now. It'll be very interesting to hear whether Associate Justice Brett Kavanaugh uses full name James David Vance or instead J.D. Vance. We'll see what the incoming incoming vice president prefers as he takes the oath. You may have heard that J.D. Vance will be the youngest vice president since Richard Nixon in 1953. There have only been two younger vice presidents in American history than Vance, John Breckinridge, who served under James Buchanan in 1857, and Nixon. A Yale-educated lawyer, one-time venture capitalist who wrote about his Appalachian roots in Hillbilly Elegy, a former Trump critic who embraced the MAGA movement as it embraced him in his run for the Senate from Ohio in 2022. Here with Vance is his wife, Usha, and their three children, although the three kids are not going to be on the stage. They're just too young. Two boys. Ewan turns 8 this year. Vivek is 5 next month. And daughter Maribel just turned 3. The crowd has now welcomed the incoming First Lady, Melania Trump, in her black hat, now standing next to her son, Barron, as the crowd silently awaits the announcement of, well, whoever's next. You're listening to live coverage from ABC News of the President's inauguration. I'm Stephen Portnoy here in Washington. The oath that Vice President-elect Vance will take is longer than the one the President takes, and I'll explain it in just a moment.
Of the United States. Ranking member of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, the Honorable Deb Fischer, House Democratic Leader, the Honorable Hakeem Jeffries, and Senate Majority Secretary, the Honorable Robert Duncan.
This is the announcement of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies. Technically, they are the hosts, and we'll soon hear from Minnesota Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar, who chairs what we call the J6 Committee. They've been hosting this event since 1901.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, the Honorable Joseph R. Biden, Jr., and Vice President of the United States, the Honorable Kamala Devi Harris.
The blue curtain parts, and in walk the current President and Vice President with just under 22 minutes left on their terms. Kamala Harris defeated by Donald Trump in the last election, waving to the attendees who politely give her a standing ovation. Joe Biden looks on adoringly, smiles at the crowd. 52 years ago this month, Joe Biden made his entrance into Washington as a 30-year-old senator, barely old enough to serve, and he leaves office as the oldest president, a record that Donald Trump is now on track to surpass 4 years from now.
Ladies and gentlemen, escorting the Vice President-elect, the Executive Director for the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, Mr. Michael Wagner, Senate Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms and Doorkeeper, Jason Bell, and House Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms, Mr. Sean Keating.
And here come those dignitaries. No sign yet of Vance. As I mentioned, the oath that he's going to take is longer than the one the President takes. It's not actually in the Constitution, but it's in statute, and it's the same oath that all federal office holders take. It has them vowing that they're taking the oath freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Of the United States, the Honorable J.D. Vance.
Here comes Vance in a red tie, with a warm smile, putting up his right hand to wave to the attendees, making a beeline for President Biden and shaking his hand. Now moving over to the position where he'll sit, his wife Usha just over his left shoulder. A rise from Appalachia and his roots for J.D. Vance, son of the suburbs of Cincinnati, who is now primed to become the youngest vice president since Richard Nixon. Brought to the ticket, for all intents and purposes, by Donald Trump Jr., who is seen just over the right shoulder of J.D. Vance. A strong advocate for Vance with his father as Donald Trump was deciding who should be on the ticket. And a big toothy grin from Donald Trump Jr. as he looks on admiringly at the Vice President-elect, who is set to take the oath of office in a very short while. He'll be sworn in by Associate Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who of course was appointed by Donald Trump in Trump's first term. Klobuchar of Minnesota and the other members of the committee are about to step outside, and they will escort in the man of the hour, the man soon to become the 47th president.
President-elect, the Staff Director for the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, Elizabeth Barra, House Sergeant-at-Arms, the Honorable William P. McFarland, Senate Sergeant-at-Arms and Doorkeeper, the Honorable Jennifer A. Hemingway, Senate Majority Majority Leader, the Honorable John Thune, and the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremony, House Democratic Leader, the Honorable Hakeem Jeffries, House Majority Leader, the Honorable Steve Scalise, Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Mike Johnson, Senate Democratic Leader, the Honorable Charles E. Schumer, Ranking Member of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, the Honorable Deb Fischer, and Chairwoman of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, the Honorable Amy Klobuchar.
And very shortly, with this dramatic flourish from the military band, we'll have the arrival of the President-elect of the United States, Donald John Trump, who will take the oath shortly and become the 47th President at noon Eastern Time, 18 minutes from now. I'm Stephen Portnoy, and you're listening to live coverage of the President's inauguration from ABC News.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, the Honorable Donald John Trump.
An enormous roar inside the Capitol Rotunda as the President-elect walks in, past the blue curtain, wearing a dark tie, immediately grabbing the hands of his family members to shake them, and they're giving a peck on the cheek to his wife Melania, smiling, now walking to the President Biden, shaking his hand, mouthing thank you for the crowd. Now shaking the hands of his running mate, J.D. Vance. These two men prepare to take the oath of office to serve for the next 4 years. Donald Trump becomes the second president to be swept back into office after being swept out. It hasn't happened since Grover Cleveland's re-election in 1892. Cleveland was in, and then he was ousted by Benjamin Harrison. Then he defeated Harrison in a rematch. The two rode together in the same carriage to Cleveland's second inauguration to demonstrate to the country the importance of the peaceful transfer of power. Practice of calling Cleveland the 22nd and 24th president is why we're going to call Trump the 45th and 47th president. The crowd has been told by the announcer to take its seats, and we expect this program is about to get underway. 44 minutes past the hour, just 16 minutes until the Constitution says Donald Trump becomes the 47th President of the United States. And soon we'll hear from Minnesota Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar. As chair of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, she will preside over what is essentially a congressional event to honor the incoming president. The blue curtain has parted. The crowd is silent.
Please welcome the chairwoman of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, the Honorable Amy Klobuchar.
Now this event is about to get underway.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 60th presidential inauguration. Today, President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Vance will take their oaths of office, and we will witness the peaceful transfer of power at the heart of our democracy. For the past year, I've chaired the inaugural ceremony committee, which includes the leadership of Congress from both parties. We thank the committee and Capitol staff and law enforcement who worked so hard over the last year, and especially the last 3 days. You've done a beautiful job, and you have shown grace under pressure. Our theme this year is our enduring democracy. The presence of so many presidents and vice presidents.
I'm going to interrupt Senator Klobuchar because we do have a bit of breaking news, and I want to bring in ABC's Karen Travers at the White House. Karen, we're getting word now that in his final minutes of his presidency, Joe Biden is pardoning members of his family. Please tell us more.
He is. This was a release that just came into our inboxes moments ago in the final minutes of the Biden presidency. He says he is exercising his power under the Constitution to pardon his brother Jim, Jim's wife Sarah, his sister Valerie and her husband John and his brother Frank. The president, Stephen, in his statement says the issuance of these pardons should not be mistaken as an acknowledgement that they engaged in any wrongdoing, nor should acceptance be misconstrued as an admission of guilt for any offense. A preemptive pardon, again, going back to what we spoke about earlier with the pardons for Dr. Anthony Fauci and General Mark Milley, for potential retribution by the incoming Trump administration, something that we know the president and his team were very concerned about because of things Donald Trump said out on the campaign trail. So this pardon for members of his family for anything that they might be targeted for over the last 10 years.
By my count, that's now a half dozen members of Joe Biden's own family to whom he has granted a pardon. No president has ever done anything like that before. Let's bring in ABC's Steve Roberts, our political analyst, for your reaction. Steve?
Well, you know, it's true that for a long time, Republicans have run against what they call the Biden crime family. Let's remember the president pardoned his own son, Hunter Biden. Earlier, his brother Jim has been widely reported to have some unsavory business dealings over the years. And so, given the fact that he pardoned his son a few weeks ago, this is not a surprise, because it's not just that they're worried about guilt here. If cases are brought against these figures, their reputations could be damaged, and the cost could be enormous. You don't have to successfully prosecute someone to cause a lot of damage and difficulty. So Biden is trying to protect his own family, and it's an insight into the tension between Biden world and Trump world today. For all of the ceremonies and the handshakes and the smooth transition, there's a lot of tension there as well, and it goes way back, given the fact that Trump, for many years, has accused the Biden family of criminal wrongdoing.
If you're just joining us, this is ABC News live coverage of the president's inauguration, and what we're now reporting is the breaking news. In the last few minutes, we've learned that it's his last official act. Joe Biden has pardoned at least 5 members of his own family, including his brother Jim, his sister Valerie. It appears they're spouses. He doesn't say why. He just simply says he's exercising his pardon power under the Constitution, and this should not be construed as an admission of guilt for any offense. We've never seen anything quite like it, and that's why we've interrupted Senator Klobuchar's speech. Let's continue listening in to the chairwoman of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies.
The rule of law has endured. So, as we inaugurate a new president and vice president, let us remember that the power of those in this room comes from the people. The construction workers who build our country, the teachers and healthcare workers who nurture us, the troops defending our freedoms, and yes, the firefighters in Los Angeles putting themselves on the line for us. Our democracy's strength and grit must match theirs. May God bless our nation. Thank you.
Amy Klobuchar, the Minnesota Democratic senator who chairs the committee that is putting on this event. And soon enough, next on the program, I think, is the swearing in of Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. Deb Fischer, the Nebraska Republican senator, now takes the podium.
Endurance through the years is the ultimate test. To persevere through time is the truest measure of an idea, an institution, and a nation. Our founders wrote the Constitution so that America could withstand all the twists and turns of time. They wrote it to guide us and to preserve forever our right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But as much as the truths and principles enshrined in our Constitution remain the same, our democracy promises the American people the power to change. to chart their own destiny. That's the beauty. That is the importance of democracy. It allows the endurance, the permanence of a nation through change. It allows nations like our United States both to avoid the obstacles and to seize the opportunities God has placed before us, all while staying true to our founding principles. Today is our country's 60th inauguration ceremony. Like all the others before it, it is a celebration of our right to set our uniquely American course. The past several years have been